Why wasn't she just watching your phone?
Well,
What?
Paula, you are on and people are watching you, so I don't know who is in the background there, but time to mute them.
What take this?
All right, I'm just going to mute them. Please stop talking. How's that for mute?
That I hope it works. Buttons are always better than instructions.
What happens when the instructions are with the buttons?
I tell you, it's not so easy. I
How
think
you-
you reach an age in life where you cannot follow instructions anymore. Someone needs to tell you what to do. So,
No, that-
Paula, you've just returned from the UK. Are you back from the UK?
No, I haven't left yet. I'm
Oh, you
still
haven't gone? Oh, okay.
gone. But
Okay.
I'm leaving tomorrow actually for Australia. I've got a speakers conference in Cairns, but I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. Cairns.
Cairns.
Cairns. So I belong to the Professional Speakers Association of South Africa, and they have an international conference once a year in different countries.
Okay, it should be amazing. So are you giving a talk there?
Actually, no, that's the unamazing part of it.
That's cute. So what do you do there?
So you go and listen to other speakers give talks, and you network, and you tell them what you would like to give a talk about next year when they organize the conference. I think that's what I'm going to do there.
Okay, fantastic. I know Arthur Goldstuck is a member of that.
Yeah, he's a past president of the South African chapter.
And I think it brings together some of the most interesting people in the world who all make a living out of talking. So tell us what your talks are about that you're going to be pitching.
So I've been giving talks already for quite some time, and the essence is taking what I've learned in a physical war zone and applying it digitally online. It's the same tools that are being used in physical war zones, well, not only, but many of the same tools that are used in digital networks. So for example, every time you open your laptop or you switch on your phone, you're actually entering a digital information war zone. Whereas in a real war zone, for example, you might have barbed wire. In online, you might get an algorithm. And I make the comparison between what we as journalists learned in terms of how to keep physically safe in a war zone and how a person can keep safe online. I don't think enough people realize that we are all part and parcel of a digital information war zone. And it's a very real skill that people need to learn today. It's not just digital literacy, but it's how to protect themselves. For example, not to share information before you verify it, not to share information emotionally, to try and be more rational before you pass on information, that kind of thing.
So tell me, all of us have cameras on our computers and our laptop. Do you have a cover for your camera?
Do I have a cover for my camera?
Correct.
Do I have a cover for my camera?
So many people, because you can be hacked and because someone else can turn on your camera, many people have a little thing that they put over their camera. It's like a little sliding door over their camera, and they keep it shut unless they themselves are using the camera.
We're picking up two people who say that they have bad echoes. Do you think it's coming from my side or your side?
I have a sense it may be your side, but we're going to do a test. So if I can ask Richard and Rael, I'm going to talk. Tell me if I have an echo now while I'm talking or if I don't have an echo at all. And then in another 30 seconds, I'm going to ask Paula to say a few words. And you're going to tell us if it's Paula who's echoing or if it's me who's echoing or both of them. So Yvette says, I'm not echoing. I'm waiting for Richard and Rael to tell me whether they can hear me echoing or not. And Paula, you may, if I can ask you now to say a few words.
Okay, we're testing whether or not I'm echoing. Am I echoing?
Okay, Richard says that you are echoing, which, guys, if we're both echoing, then it's actually your systems, it's not ours. Then I suggest you move across to YouTube. Yvette says there's no echo. Rael says we're both echoing. Richard says I'm echoing. Haley says she has no echo. Guys, if you do have an echo, please just move across to YouTube. You can go onto the SA Juice Reports YouTube page, and you'll be able to have them. Cheryl says she has no echo at all, and Joan Colk says no echo. So it would appear that there's not a general problem. It may just be one or two people who are listening. So if you do have an echo, please just move across to YouTube. But we don't control anything. This is the Zoom standard settings. So there's nothing we can do to control an echo. We don't turn it on or off. So Paula, we were busy talking about the one element of security is on your camera, on your computer or your laptop, to be able to have a slide across thing. Another is if you're sitting in a coffee shop, do you use the Wi-Fi?
So I know I'm not supposed to use the Wi-Fi. And very often what we did when we worked overseas is if we were forced to use the Wi-Fi, we never sent anything online, meaning that we would have something called dead man letter, which is when I would log into the same emails that my editors in Moscow, and that time I was working for RT mostly, they would be using. And I would put it in the drafts. And then they would log in on the drafts as well. But it doesn't help with your search engines, because we were always taught to clean your search engine before you travel anywhere, in case somebody wants to go through your search engines, especially when I was traveling to
So that's your search history.
My search history, sorry, to delete your search history. So I've been very careful to delete my search history. I am careful when using the general Wi-Fi. But you know, you don't always have the opportunity to actually have an alternative if you've just arrived in a country and you need to urgently get online.
Well, I'm told by experts that, for example, you should never connect to a Wi-Fi at an airport.
Yeah, it's true.
You should get an eSIM. You should connect to the eSIM on your phone, but you should never connect to the Wi-Fi at the airport. And you should never even plug in your phone to charge at an airport unless you have a specific charger that will block anything other than electricity. I have one of those. I've never used it, but I actually do have one of those.
You remind me of me going to war zones with gas masks and everything, and half the time I wouldn't use them, but at least I. But the other thing is also local SIMs. We were always encouraged to buy local SIM cards, so that when you go to another country, you use a local SIM, and then as you leave, you throw it away, and that you don't use the international SIM.
I mean, it's warfare, and seeing there's a war busy going on with Iran at the moment, let's not forget, for example, the Stuxnet virus.
Yeah.
Which is, if you remember, what the Israelis did was they infected the Iranian nuclear program with a virus called Stuxnet. Everything looked okay. All the monitors on all the gauges and dials all looked perfect. But while they did that, the Israelis sped up all the centrifuges and spun them all until they all broke.
You just got Israelis on your side.
But it's not just Israelis. I mean, this is proper warfare. So I think option number one is to have no enemies and do nothing that's truly confidential. And I think that applies to almost all of us. There's nothing that we actually do that is of any value to anyone else other than our banking details. So the one security thing that I do is if I'm working in a coffee shop and I need to go onto my bank, I get off the coffee shop Wi-Fi and I go into my phone Wi-Fi and I connect that way.
I think you also have to accept that you're always being monitored, that by and large, you go, you know, just accept that you could potentially be hacked at any moment, and then just behave accordingly, because I think we live in a world. I remember when I was based in Israel, being told also that even when your cell phone's off, even when I put it in the room, that the safe room in the apartment, it was still being listened through.
I don't know if I have it in my study here, but I've certainly got it in my home, something called the Faraday bag. And should you not want anyone to listen into a telephone conversation on your phone, you put it in. It has a metal surrounding. It's like a Faraday cage, and you just slip your phone into a Faraday bag, and then you're relatively safe. But before you do that, you turn off all your Wi-Fi. You go on airplane mode. You then turn off your phone as well, and then you stick it into the Faraday bag. All of it completely unnecessary in my line of work, but you never know.
You could write a book, I think, or just issue a manual on how to keep safe in Joburg. Why? Is it mostly for living in Joburg or mostly for when you travel?
It's just lessons for
living
life.
In today.
Living in today's times, absolutely. I'm just looking a little yellow on my screen, so I'm just going to try it, see if I can get a little brighter. Maybe it's the clothing I'm wearing today. So, Paula, we're going to start in 5 minutes, and this is our pre-chat, and we welcome everyone in. And there's been a huge response to people wanting to hear your story. And of course, we're broadcasting tonight on YouTube, on Facebook, on Zoom, and just the registrations have been enormous. What do you think it is about your story that seems to resonate so much with people?
I think it's mostly the fact that I got conned by my ex-husband, that I married a man, fell in love, and lost my entire life savings to him. And I mentioned to you briefly this afternoon, and I think it's worth mentioning to people who are listening at the moment, that ever since you started advertising this webinar, I have received about a dozen messages of women who've been in similar situations. Obviously, not exactly the same, but whether they were conned by someone online, an ex-husband, a friend. And I think maybe there's something about going public with a story that is potentially deeply shaming, because I have been deeply ashamed that this happened to me and that I allowed it to happen to the extent that I did. I think that particularly with people who've been through that, maybe it resonates. And I think for some other people, they probably dumbfounded. How can a reasonably intelligent, although they might be questioning the reasonably.
But you in fact said to me, you had heard these stories happening to other people, and you just thought, oh, they must be really stupid.
I did. I would read about women being conned, and I just assumed it would never happen to me. It wasn't even a question. And it was always like, well, I mean, it was obvious that she was being conned. How did she not pick up on it? And when I share my story with you tonight, Howard, as I share my story, I know that I'm going to be thinking that there's a red flag, and it's so obvious as it unfolds. But I have found that you live the con going forward, and it's only really obvious when you look at it in retrospect, and the red flags are glaringly obvious, but only when you look backwards and you know what to look for. When you're living it forward and you fall in love with what you believe is your dream person, your soulmate, you're not looking for red flags. And maybe part of it is falling in love and really wanting to believe that this is the person. So maybe when we are in that kind of state of mind and our heart is hammering away, maybe our defenses are down, and one would want them to be down. But, maybe in the world in which we live, it's quite sad. One can't be as vulnerable perhaps as one would like to be.
I'm going to ask you during the broadcast, the decision to actually go public with the story rather than hide in the shadows and the shame. It could not have been an easy decision to take.
No, it wasn't. And I'll wait for you to ask it and I'll answer it. But it really wasn't an easy decision.
But nothing in your life has been easy. And that's why when we were talking about what do we call tonight's webinar, and we used the Lemony Snicket's title, a series of unfortunate events. And I think we're going to go through the story of a life that's very unusual. Certainly not your typical Johannesburg Jewish kid, comes out of school, does whatever. Your life is the most atypical maybe of anyone else you know. What does your mother think when she thinks about you and your life?
The funny thing is, whenever I give talks, my mom's often in the audience, or my dad would be in the audience, and there would always be a question about, what do your folks think about this? And I would throw to them. My father would say, was it the vegetables that they gave me as a kid? My mom would say, nothing. It was my daughter's decision. And for that, I'm eternally grateful. That I don't know where the quote is from, but if you love something, set it free. And if it comes back, it's yours. And if it doesn't, it never was. And I think I was just blessed to have parents who didn't mind that I dreamt of going to war zones. They let me go, and I always came home. So I think that because I think if my parents had begged me not to go, I might have still gone, but it would have been heavier and harder. So I think it definitely helped that I had the support of them. Or maybe they just wanted me out of the house, and, the first was better.
There's a beautiful clip. I'm not sure if we're actually going to show it tonight or not, but there's a beautiful clip. I think it's from Ukraine, and some of the soldiers are talking about, I think he was Italian, if his family in Italy knew where he was and what you're doing. And you say, I've got parents in South Africa, if they knew where I was.
And then I was hoping that Russia Today would headline it by saying brave RT journalist, because I literally was on the front line of Slavyansk. And if you see the clip, I'm lying right underneath a stationary train, and the snipers are firing over, and you see bullet holes everywhere. And instead of saying brave reporter lying under a train on the front line, they go, RT journalist afraid her parents in South Africa will see her on TV, which kind of lessened or diluted the whole brave war zone scenario or persona that I was trying to put across.
Well, the time has just gone 7 p.m. and a huge welcome to everyone who's joined us this evening. We're broadcasting tonight on YouTube, on Zoom, and on Facebook. And most importantly, we want to tell you this isn't just a conversation between Paula and myself. This is a conversation that we'd love to include all of you on. So no matter what platform you're watching us on, please make sure that you comment, that you ask questions, and we'll make sure that all of those questions and comments are brought through and give Paula the opportunity to answer those questions as well. This is the 192nd broadcast brought to you by the SA Jewish Report, being watched now approximately 7 million times, watched around the globe. And so a big welcome to wherever you're watching from. And please take a moment in the comment section and actually tell us where you're watching tonight's broadcasts from. We are so honored this evening to have Paula Slier, internationally renowned journalist, award-winning journalist, join us. But before we do that, let us just quickly run you through some of the housekeepings. As you know, this series is brought to you by the SA Jewish Report, and you should go pick up your hard copy edition or read us online. So our hard copy edition, the front page this week is about South Africans really stranded around the globe. People who are in Bahrain and UAE and Tokyo and Israel, all trying to get home. But some of the major airlines in the world are just not flying at the moment. So we track down some of those amazing people, and we actually go and ask them about how they're getting home. Vice Chair of the Jewish Report, Benji Porter, was stuck after a race in Tokyo, supposed to be flying through Qatar, and couldn't get back through Qatar and had to be rerouted via Singapore. So don't forget, you can either go and download the entire edition of the Jewish Report online, or pick up a hard copy, or alternatively, look at each of the individual articles by themselves. But also, we deliver news directly into your inbox. So if you haven't subscribed, if you aren't one of the approximately 38,500 people who get our digital newsletter on a Tuesday, a Thursday, and a Friday, don't forget, that's exactly where you can go and subscribe. It's a bit.ly link /SAJR inbox. And you can subscribe for our 3 times a week digital newsletter, and you can make sure that the news is delivered directly into your inbox. Also, please don't forget that if you're picking up your hard copies, there are so many places, about 240 places around the country where you can go pick it up. Kosher World has hundreds and hundreds of copies in Glen Hazel. Checkers around the country, Exclusive Books, Discam, Pick and Pay, Spars, Check Dry Cleaners, Thrups, your school, your kosher bakeries, butcheries, delis and eatery, your shul. We're all over the place. So be some of the people who come and read us online, about 280,000 people who read us online every month, or the 38,500 people who get the digital copy, or the thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of people who read us in hard copy each week. Be part of our family, please. Also, don't forget that all of our webinars are available in 2 places, either through our website, just go and click on our little webinar icon, or alternatively, you can go into YouTube under SA Jewish Report, and you will find of the 192 webinars, probably about 175 are actually there online. You can go back and watch at any point in time. And with that, of course, tonight we are talking to Paula Slier. And the events that she's going to be telling us this evening are personal and lived by her. We cannot independently verify the accuracy of her accounts, although we have a long and detailed relationship with Paula. And during the week, Paula's ex-husband contacted us with a cease and desist letter asking us not to go ahead with tonight's broadcast. We believe that tonight is a very important story to tell. If Paula's ex-husband wishes to dispute any of the facts contained in tonight's broadcast, we want to give him the right of reply. In fact, that's specifically what we offered him. We offered him the opportunity to come on tonight's broadcast and specifically contradict or tell his side, a right of reply, which he declined. I'm sure he's watching this evening. And if at any point in time in the future he would like to come on and tell his side of the story, we are more than welcome to host him on one of our webinars as well. And so with that, welcome, Paula Slier. We were saying just before we began, you are not a normal sort of young girl, young white Jewish girl coming out of South Africa. Give us the 2 minutes background, who you are before you entered into the wild world of journalism and war.
So I grew up in Highlands North. I matriculated deputy head girl from Waverley Girls, and I went on to Wits because I had a Jewish father who said, it doesn't matter what you study, just study, get a degree. Although the one thing he did say is don't study psychology because you won't make a living from it. So I was at Wits for 3 years. I actually majored in philosophy and international relations. Those were not supposed to be my majors. I wanted to major in English and law because I wanted to be a lawyer or a journalist. And English had 19 set works, which was too many for me. And law, I just didn't enjoy. I remember first day in law, the lecturer said, look at the person in front of you, behind you, to your right and to your left, and only one of you will be here next year. And I looked at them and I felt sorry for them. And I was the one who wasn't there the following year. And I had taken philosophy because I thought it would make me more interesting. And I'd taken international relations because it was an easy credit, and those landed up becoming my majors. So Wits, from an academic point of view, wasn't exactly the highlight of my career or my life. And then blessed Helen Heldemuth, of blessed memory, she was my mentor. She started Shalom TV, which later became L'Chaim TV. And I went for an audition. Actually, initially, I was with Soldiers. I was the media officer on campus. And I contacted Helen and I said, would you like any youth show? And she said, we'd love it. Come in and talk to me. I went in, she gave me a youth slot, and with no television, but with all the love and warmth and support in the world. If it wasn't for Helen Heldemuth, I don't know if I would have had my break in TV, and I owe my entire career to her. And then after starting with Shalom TV, which later became L'Chaim, I was inside the SABC building. And then I kind of mustered up the courage to go and knock on doors. And Good Morning South Africa gave me a job. And then from there, I was in the building. I got a job at the newsroom, and it kind of evolved further. So I was just very lucky. Television and broadcast, certainly in those days, and I would imagine today as well, is one of those industries where it's a lot about who you know rather than what you know. And like I say, Helen was my blessing.
Well, can we talk about another blessing? Because you mentioned your father. And Lionel, who passed away, about a year ago, Lionel, long history, a reporter and writer for the Jewish Report, someone with whom the Jewish Report had so much respect and admiration, and who served our community so well that it's actually such a privilege to continue a relationship with the next generation of Sliers.
Oh, how you make me want to cry when you mention my dad. I was so close to my father, and one of the saddest parts of the story, about which we'll get onto later, about my ex-husband and the con, was that I found out that I'd been conned the same week that my dad passed away. And when we were sitting Shiva, he was stealing my company and forging signatures. And even to this day, I feel like I haven't had the opportunity to really mourn my father in the way I would have wanted to, because there was so much other drama happening in my life. But I adored my dad. I absolutely adored him. And I used to, in the months before he passed away, he was quite ill. And I used to shout, and he'd always say to me, why are you shouting at me? But he could hardly hear me. So I wanted to make sure he could hear me. And I'd say, Dad, I love you. Do you know that I love you? And then he'd say, well, firstly, you don't have to shout. And secondly, yes, I know you love me. And the one thing my father always used to say to me was, thank you for choosing me to be your dad. And I just feel eternally blessed that I was his daughter. And people loved asking him, so does your daughter get her journalism from you? Because he wrote for the Jewish Report. He loved it. And he loved telling people with a huge chuckle, no, he got his journalism from his daughter, because he was actually a diamond trader. And he only started writing and entering the journalism industry when he retired. So he used to get a good laugh from saying that he learned from me how to be a journalist.
So, Paula, we're not going to tell the story tonight, but we'll just drop a little snippet. Your dad lived his last few years at the Grand Strip Club in Rivonia. We're not going to tell that story, but boy,
That's the most interesting story.
He died a very happy man.
May I mention that you and Peter, as part of your urgent research and, for the Jewish Report, perhaps had a meeting with me there one night and my dad?
I certainly remember it well. So Paula, let's get back to the story. It's you're a journalist, you're at the SABC, you're involved in news, and then you decide to make Aliyah. Why that decision?
Well, firstly, I kept very quiet about making Aliyah because I had predominantly journalist, non-Jewish friends. And even when I made Aliyah back in 2005, it was an unpopular decision, particularly amongst the journalist circles in South Africa. So if I wanted to be perceived as being a serious journalist who was moving across to the Middle East, I couldn't really let my biases. I mean, I don't even know if that's the right way of putting it, Howard, but I know that in the initial years, I kept quiet about the fact that I made Aliyah. I had always loved Israel. I think going to Waverley Girls, I was one of three Jewish girls in the school. So I think that I had always felt a little bit left out. The first time I really made a huge circle of Jewish friends was at university when I joined Soldiers. And I think partly looking for an identity, partly wanting to uncover what being Jewish means. That was part of the drive to go to Israel. I made Aliyah when I was 31. And I think part of it was also that I wanted to break out of a restricted journalism environment like the SABC in South Africa. And I wanted to try my hand at the Middle East, at global news. Christina Amanpour, of course, would have been my hero in those days. And I watched her all the time on CNN. And Israel seemed the right springboard to go and then to launch a career in international politics.
So were you able to move across your journalism when you move and go live in Israel?
Yes and no, because the first 10 months I was unemployed. I lived in Machane Yehuda, which is the shuk in Jerusalem.
The marketplace.
The marketplace in Jerusalem. I had a mattress that was on the floor. I had a television set that was on the floor, and I had one chair. That's the only furniture I had. I remember one of the guys in the marketplace used to give me free food because he felt so sorry for me. And I survived those initial 10 months by writing for South African newspapers and magazines and publications, but I very much was looking for the South African angle on stories. And I found there's South Africans living in the West Bank. There were South Africans in Gaza. So it wasn't a problem to find a South African angle. But how many stories can you do for a publication about South Africans living in the Middle East? So after about 10 months, the freelance work was drying up, and I was looking for work in Israel. And they were not looking. I literally was knocking on doors, and thankfully the Associated Press bureau chief was honest with me, and he said to me, look, you come from South Africa, you don't know the politics here as well as people who grew up in the region. You don't speak Hebrew. I didn't speak Hebrew. And we've got people coming who speak English, Hebrew, and who also potentially speak Arabic. So what are you able to offer us that is not something we can get from people here? And he said to me, you're going to struggle. And so it wasn't that easy to actually find a job in Israel. Funny enough, I got offered 2 jobs on the same day. The one was to join IBA, which was the Israeli Broadcasting Association, for their English service department, which might sound glamorous, but it's actually the forgotten department in Israel. And the other one was to join Russia Today. And I said to my father, I applied, I heard that there's this correspondent job going with Russian television. Should I take it? And my father, whose mother came from Belarus, said, absolutely not. Your grandmother would be turning in her grave if she knew you were going to work for the Russians. She never had anything good to say about the Russians. But to cut long story short, I took it. I thought it would last 3 or 4 months till a real job came along. And 18 years later, I was still working for Russian television.
I want to talk about your working for SABC and being a Middle East correspondent for SABC, because Snooki Zikalala was then head of news.
Ah, there's a name
And
that has kept me awake at night.
tell us about Snooki and his perspective on you.
So Snooki Zikalala started out in the newsroom, the same as me as a journalist, and then within 1 year, he was the head of news. I'm talking back in 1995.
Political appointment, ANC
Political
hack.
appointment. I mean, we used to joke in the newsroom that he used to run the torture camps for the ANC, and now he'd come to torture all of us at the SABC. And I say that because he was deeply unpopular, particularly amongst the white journalists. It was an agenda of his to get rid of all of us. And by the time I left the SABC news department, I think I was the last, if not one of the last, white journalists who was there. But Snooki took a particular dislike to me, not just because of my color, but because I was Jewish. And it subsequently came out that he had put together a blacklisting of 8 people. I don't know if he personally wrote it, but he certainly approved it. And this SABC blacklisting had prestigious names like the brother of the former President Thabo Mbeki, Karina Brown, who later became the editor of the Business Day. There were some pretty top people on that list, and I was on the list as well, because according to Snooki, it was imperative that they cover the war in Israel, which he called the Middle East war, objectively. And then he went on to argue, as if it was logical, that because I was Jewish, I supported Israel, and he supported the PLO and the Palestinian position, so I could not be relied on to report objectively about what was happening in Israel. Now, I had left SABC, and this was the same year that Yasser Arafat was dying. And I had gone to Ramallah. It was my first time in Ramallah. I had no security. I had no idea what I was doing, to be honest. I lived in a youth hostel. I had bought myself with my savings a small television camera, and I was filming. And I had been filing reports from Ramallah each day to the SABC as a freelancer about the situation and the mood on the ground with Arafat dying. And as luck would have it, Murphy's Law, the night before he died is the night that Snooki Zikalala gave an alert to the SABC department that they were never to accept any work from me. And so the next morning, Arafat, the reports came through that he had died. I phoned SABC and they said, no, we are under strict instructions not to receive any reports from you. And I had no idea what had happened. I phoned my then editor, Jimmy Matthews, and I said, what must I do? I'm in Ramallah, he's died. You know, they say there's nothing worse than being in the right place at the wrong time, but there's nothing worse than being in the wrong place at the right time. I was in the right place at the wrong time with no one to report for. And Jimmy Matthews said, just find somebody else to work for. And I phoned Katie Katapodis. And that's how I got my stringing job at 702. She said she'd never hired anybody so quickly in her life. She said, Paula, last night you were on SABC, and SABC's in competition to 702 because of SABC radio. And I said, I don't work for them from this morning. Please hire me. And that phone call, literally 10 seconds, she put me on air and I started reporting. And then later that evening, Jimmy Matthews phoned me and said, the SABC wants you back. And I thought, you know what, I didn't think they were going to want me back for a long time. I think it was just to get me reporting on Yasser Arafat's passing. And so that was the day that I picked up my gig with 702 and ended my career with SABC. And it was only when I came back to South Africa a few months later that Jimmy and I went out for dinner and he told me that I was on this blacklist.
So actually, tell us about the night that Arafat died.
So the news came through in the morning. I was so green in those days, Howard. You know, you said like I had an ordinary Jewish upbringing. I really did. So I'm even embarrassed to tell you that that morning there was the call to prayer. I didn't even know what the call to prayer was when the mosques call people to prayer. And I suddenly thought that there was a protest happening. And I grabbed my camera and I went running out the door, ready to film everything. I didn't understand Arabic. I didn't understand that I was at the main square in Ramallah. I really was naive. And sometimes there's something to be said for being naive. Anyway, later in the morning, people started marching, and they were all marching to the compound where Yasser Arafat was. He wasn't physically in the compound. He'd actually been taken to France for treatment, but they were bringing him back. And I couldn't get telephone signal. and I was trying to report the story for 702. And I went into someone's house. Well, it was a building with different apartments. And I knew I wanted to get on the roof to get signal and to be able to look over into the compound where the 2 helicopters would come later in the day carrying Yasser Arafat's body. And so I went running up the stairs and I just knocked at the Arab family that lived at the top. They didn't speak English. I didn't speak Arabic, but I managed to explain, please, I want balcony. And then 702 often couldn't get hold of me because the lines were dropping. So I gave them the local number of this family. And this poor family became like my secretary. And the wife used to come and say, radio phone. And that was 702 phoning on the landline and wanting to talk to me. And then I remember that they flew in the 2 helicopters later in the day. Everybody stood on the roof and everybody was very silent. It was a very poignant moment in Ramallah. I remember doing crossings for 702 every half hour. I remember my dad worried because he'd gone to Pick and Pay with the little radio and I wasn't on that half hour and he wanted to know if I was still alive. The things we put our parents through. And I said to him, no, Dad, it was just bad receptions. That's why I hadn't actually done a radio broadcast that half hour. But I actually stayed in touch with that family for quite a number of years. I didn't ever share with them that I was Jewish, which was one of the dilemmas I've had over the years, is going to Syria and Lebanon and all these Arab countries that are at war with Israel and making friends. And on the one hand, knowing that if I tell them I'm Jewish and Israeli, it compromises or it carries so much weight because of the part of the world that I'm in. But on the other hand, wanting to say, you like me and I'm Jewish and Israeli, like, can we move beyond the names, the identities that people have and just try and see people for who they are?
So Paula, you said you get a job offer from Russia today. Your father says, don't do it. What are your expectations? Do you think you're going to be a journalist or do you think you're going to be a propagandist? And how did that pan out?
Well, I really appreciate the question. Thanks, Howard. Thanks for asking me. And don't shy away from asking me whether or not I was a propagandist. And I'm sure you're not going to, and you will ask me that. Initially, I just thought it was going to be a job. I just thought a couple of months, Russian TV, you have to take yourself back to 2000. We started in December 2005. So we're going back, 20 years. It was unheard of to have all these channels. Al Jazeera started the next year. French TV started the next year, France 24. So the idea of a Russian television network in English was just something unheard of. And it wasn't exciting to me. I actually remember thinking, is this the level to which my career has plummeted? I spent my 20s at the SABC, slowly working my way up the ladder. I have this run-in with Snooki Zikalala. Now I'm unemployed for 10 months. And now I'm working for Russian television in English. We had, the technology was new in those days, and I used to send the video over the internet. It was all still new. And we didn't go on air for the first few months. So it was like this idea of sending video to Russia, the other end of the world. I never saw anything online. I never saw the broadcast. So it all just felt very strange. And then fast forward a couple of months and the second Lebanon war breaks out. And that would have been the middle of 2006. And I don't remember why, but I just remember thinking, again, it maybe was the vegetables my father gave me, hell, it would be cool to go and cover a war in Lebanon. And I spoke to my editor in Moscow and he said, you want to do this? And I said, yes. And they said, great, please go. And that's how I got into reporting war. I had no training. I thought it would be an interesting thing to do. And the next thing I was in Lebanon. And I think that's why my bravery in the first few years was bravery, because a lot of it was actually learning on the job and seeing what was happening. It was not a propaganda channel in those days. I don't even think it was set up to be a propaganda channel per se. I think it found its footing as the years went by. In 2008, we had the Russia-Ossetia War, the Russia-Georgia War. And that was the first time that we started getting direction from Moscow, what they wanted us to cover. But for the first 2.5 years, a lot of it was me interviewing people who came from the former Soviet Union in Israel and just asking them their opinion on things. We had a lot of travel shows that came out of Russia. It was really just looking at Russia or presenting Russia to the English-speaking world in a way that maybe they were unaware of before. I mean, it was set up by the government, and the Russian President Putin said as much, that instead of having English experts speak about Russia, let's have Russians speaking about Russia. So initially, there was no question about propaganda. There was no question about, am I fighting an information war? It wasn't like that. It became like that as the years went on.
So as time went by, and things start becoming more propaganda, what level of freedom do you have? Can you report things as you see it, or are you given instructions before every report?
So both are true. Firstly, remember, I primarily became a war reporter. So I was actively in war zones most of the time, reporting what I saw in front of me, which is relatively easy because you see something, you report it. When it starts becoming propaganda is when, for example, they would send me to Eastern Ukraine, which is that part of Ukraine where the locals support Russia. So nobody there was going to speak negatively about Russia. So it was very easy to report accurately. Do you like Russia? Yes, you like Russia. Are you against the Ukrainian war? Yes, we as Russian Ukrainians who live in Ukraine but are ethnically Russian are against the government in Kiev, and we support the Russian President Vladimir Putin. That's not inaccurate. That was real reporting what I see on the ground. But it is propaganda in the sense that when you fit that narrative into the Russia Today global perspective, which is the perspective that this is a channel that is supporting only the Russian point of view, then obviously you're feeding into an information machine. The way the Russians would argue against it is they would say, well, you have BBC and you have CNN and you have all the Western networks that are reporting from Kiev and they're showing the other side of the war. You switch on Russia Today, which is one of the reasons why I was able to go to sleep most nights, was that we're not lying, we're not pretending to be an objective, independent channel. We were a Russian channel, which was called Russia Today, RT. So you're getting the Russian perspective on news.
Russian government perspective.
Russian government perspective, 100%. And then, of course, the question people have asked me over the years is how much did that represent the Russian population, which is also hard to say. Don't forget, I wasn't based in Russia. I was based in Israel. So when I would go to Russia, very much the feeling on the ground was that people supported Putin. But whether that was genuine support, whether it was from fear, and whether or not there were lots of people who didn't support him but were too afraid to come to the streets and protest, I don't know. And it's definitely imaginable that was the situation. I do want to just backtrack one moment. Howard, you asked me about whether or not they would tell me what to say. They didn't have to tell me what to say. You see, what happens is when you report from a particular perspective long enough, A, you understand that perspective, and B, something I had to monitor myself constantly is because I was always telling the Russian perspective on news, I started to see the world through the Russian perspective, which is why I appreciated having my sister Haley in London phoning me and saying, people in London hate Russia, Paula. Not the whole world agrees with what you say. My father, when I used to phone him in Joburg, he loved Putin. So that's how I knew that Russia Today was doing its job and my father was watching RT nonstop. But for example, when I went to Syria, the Russians supported the Syrian president Bashar al-Assad. On the one hand, it was useful working for Russian TV in the Arab world because most of the Arab world supports Russia. So I always felt like I had that extra line of protection because I was working for Russian TV. It became a little bit confusing and risky if people realized I had an Israeli passport. I don't speak Russian. And I didn't learn Russian in the 18 years I worked for them. So often, when guns are blaring and rockets are firing and everybody's screaming Russian and I'm speaking English, it's hard to explain to a Russian soldier with a Kalashnikov, no, she's part of the Russian network. There were times that it became very tricky. But,
so can I ask on Syria? So when you go to report to Syria, and there are 500,000 people at least who died in the civil war in Syria, most of them killed by Bashar al-Assad and his troops with Russian help and support and Russian military bases in the country. Do you tell that story or do you tell a different story?
We told a different story. So again, that would have what you're saying now, the Russians would argue that that's the story being told by CNN and BBC and Western media, and it's one narrative coming out there. Not enough people hearing the Russian point of view in the Western world. I will come back to your question, but you need to understand that Russia Today was broadcast in several languages. Was Russia Today English, which would be for an audience like you and me who don't speak Russian as a first language. There was Russia Today Arabic, putting across the Russian perspective in the Arab world. There was Russia Today Spanish, which was putting across, Today Spanish, putting across the Russian perspective in the Spanish-speaking world. And sorry, I just need to switch this off. Somebody phoning from Russia.
Probably watching. Definitely watching.
So Howard, the Russian perspective in Syria, we were very much on the front line. We were very much, let me just tell them that I'm on a live webinar.
Okay. So how about this, Paula? What we're going to do, we're going to show an advert because amazingly we have two sponsors of tonight's broadcast, one of whom is Italtal. Now, anyone who's ever renovated a home or built a home in South Africa knows Italtal really, really well. They're the top tiles providers in the country. So we've got about a 2.5 minute advert from Italtal, who are one of the sponsors of tonight's broadcast. And let's show that while you sort out your camera and you tell the Russians that they mustn't come and kill you for what you've told us.
It sounds like a deal.
Gilana, can we roll that advert, please?
Beautiful life. 2 words that say so much about the creation of a better, finer, more fulfilled and abundant life experience, which was the passionate pursuit of a small Italian tile business that opened its doors in 1969 in Alberton, Johannesburg. And so, Bella Vita, the beautiful life, came to Southern Africa. That small operation grew into the 12 showroom and online shopping style icon that has become synonymous with inspirational living. With an eye for design and creativity and a passion for perfection, Italtile is a trend leader, a brand that has raised the bar for the curation of the world's most exclusive and desirable home improvement names from Italy, Spain, Switzerland, and Thailand. Italtile ensures an end-to-end service to help customers live beautifully. Our sales advisors study for an interior design certification with the renowned Chapters Design Company. With our sample service, customers can take home and try before they buy. Each showroom offers Italtile's signature blend coffee, but Italtile's beautiful service doesn't end at the door. Another Italtile retail differentiator is our residential agents who are on hand to deliver our customers' decor dreams for new builds, rebuilds, or extensions. Specialized technical products, extensive range, and professional advice are also the hallmarks of Italtile Commercial. And it shows. With a national footprint, Italtile offers top-notch local and imported products to high-end commercial projects, both in SA and beyond our borders. Our teams of commercial experts collaborate with building project professionals, specifying the perfect finishes for some of Southern Africa's most beautiful commercial developments. Our service ethic is most authentically showcased in the Italtile Outreach projects. As our 50th anniversary year approaches, we look to a future of new directions, but we take with us our foundation, laid in 1969. The Italtile Way. Sitting at the heart of the Italtile family, the desire to make every living environment we touch more beautiful. Italtile. Live beautifully.
So, Paula, I hope the Russians didn't want to kill you after that.
I'm still alive and speaking. I just switched off my phone and said, please don't call.
Cool. So we're busy talking about working for Russia Today. Tell us the story they want you to tell about Israel.
Howard, I just want to quickly, if you don't mind, 1 minute, just finish answering the question about Syria. You were saying that, you know, all these people are dying, and what's the story that the Russians are putting across? The Russians had me on the front line, so I was right on the front line that kept moving. And the Russian angle on the story was that there was weapons that were being discovered that were constantly changing hands. Now, you might say that this is Russian propaganda, and of course I'm open to that, but the Russian perspective was that there were warehouses where there were chemical weapons, and sometimes those chemical weapons were in the hands of Islamic State, sometimes those chemical weapons were in the hands of Bashar al-Assad, sometimes those chemical chemical weapons were in the hands of ordinary people. And so they constantly pushed the line, that it wasn't clear who was carrying out the chemical weapon strikes. Number two, they constantly pushed the line that Bashar al-Assad had been democratically elected, which I know people will raise eyebrows at, but it was an important point that the Russians pushed across, was that, and I think they did that because in the same way that Putin claims he has the authority of his population, so the point was made that the Syrians and Bashar al-Assad had the authority of his people. In terms of Israel, the relationship between Russia and Israel has always been quite a good relationship. I mean, people over the years have said to me, if it's such a good relationship, why, as a Russian government television channel, was the narrative always more sympathetic towards the Palestinians? And the best answer I have come up with is that what is media? It's very much perception. And Russia has always positioned itself, whether it's in the United Nations or in the public halls of perception and opinion, as siding with the Arab world. So it was quite clear to me that my brief was to be much more sympathetic to the Palestinian side. Over the years, that brief became more and more clear, and that became harder and harder for me to deal with. And so here is where people might think that I did a disservice, and I'm open to that. We spoke about my father. I used to get SMSs from my dad, not happy with the story you just did on RT. And I knew exactly what he was talking about. The stories were not inaccurate. I spent a lot of time in Gaza until we were not allowed to go there from the Israeli side, and I'd have to go in through Rafah from the Egyptian side. And I spent a lot of time in the West Bank. Every story I told was accurate. But where the discomfort came is that the stories were not balanced with the same kind of sympathy, the same kind of understanding, and the same kind of attention to civilian suffering as was happening on the Israeli side. So I covered the one Gaza war from Gaza. The next Gaza war I covered from Israel, because we decided, or at least I felt, let's at least have an Israeli perspective and get a freelance journalist to do it from Gaza. And there was an attempt to try, you see, the problem is you can't compare numbers. And as soon as you make this a number game, Israel's always going to be on the losing end. And it's not fair. But, I would show the trauma that kids in Israel feel running to the mamad, to the shelter all the time. But it's so hard when a story like that is juxtaposed with a story coming out of Gaza where children are being killed by the dozens. And then I would show the Israeli perspective, which is how the military really tries to strike military targets. But then they would show the Gaza perspective, where you'd have locals saying, well, they kill indiscriminately, and why are so many civilians being killed? And then you would argue from the Israeli side because they use them as human shields. And, I reached a point in my career where I actually felt that being a journalist was doing a disservice to the conflicts I cover. And that's where I am today as well, where I feel like something like the Israeli Palestinian conflict goes back so far and needs so much context that because media is so often headlines and sound bites, you lose the nuances, you lose the context, that I started not being proud of the work I do. Not that I don't think I was doing journalism, but that I think in the bigger context of wanting people to understand what's going on, you feed into the kind of quick narratives that people have. And people just take the headlines and the narratives and they glean what they want. And it's just become a million times worse with social media. I was lucky, at least in the beginning of my career, to go to war zones. Today, people call themselves journalists and they do armchair journalism, where they just sit on their computers and just regurgitate what's being said. And no one's even checking if initially the first things that were said were even right. The whole industry is in crisis, and we've become a profession of verification, of trying to work out what is true, what is not true. Whereas at least when I started my career all those years ago, we were at least attempting to do something good. I'm not so sure journalists are doing that today.
So a reminder to everyone who's busy watching us, if you're watching us on YouTube, please click the like and subscribe button. That allows us to communicate with you. So please, it's a small thing that we ask you to do. But please don't watch us without liking and subscribe what we actually do. That allows us not only to notify you when we have webinars, but also it allows us to grow our channel. So that's the one favor we ask back in return for these webinars. But Paula, if I can, to give people a sense of what it was like to be a war journalist, I want you to take us on a journey, and we've put through a few little videos and a few little slides. And if I can ask you to kind of give us some anecdotes, because you're in amazing places. You were in Gaza, you were in Syria, you were in Iraq, you were in Lebanon, you were in Egypt, you were in Libya during the fall of Gaddafi. These are inconceivable stories that a little girl from Joburg is actually living that life. So if I can share my screen with people, and if maybe you can just take us through, the first thing we're going to do is just watch a little short video, and then we'll go on to some of the war zones that you're in.
I can hear people screaming in the street, and we were hearing the same kind of sound. So let's just stay down and...
This is the front line. The civilians here cannot fight ISIS.
Everybody started crouching here. We're taking position.
A correspondent was covering the protest when that tear gas was unleashed.
I'm fighting for my people, friends and family members that we lost.
I can hear people screaming in the street.
So Paula, tell us where this photo is.
So this is Calandia Crossing. I must have spent many an hour every Friday after prayers, the midday Friday prayers in the mosques in Jerusalem and in the West Bank. People would come, and there were always clashes from the Ramallah side with the police on the Jerusalem side. There would be tear gas, there would be some rubber bullets. This was basically a Friday afternoon for me.
But it wasn't just in the war zones. You got time to sit down with President Shimon Peres and to interview him. What did you think of him?
Oh, he was one of my highlights. I interviewed Netanyahu as well, but this interview with Shimon Peres, he came to South Africa, if you remember, on behalf of the IUA-UCF, and that was the last international trip he did, was coming to South Africa. This was before he came. This was in Israel. He was a wise man. He spoke so beautifully, and he still upheld the whole ideal of peace between Israelis and Palestinians, which I have to say, after living in Israel and reporting on the conflict for 18 years, I've started to lose hope that it can ever be resolved. But he really seemed to believe that it could be.
And if people get an opportunity in Jaffa or close to Jaffa, is the Peres Peace Museum, and absolutely essential viewing. Deals with his peace efforts, deals with innovation and technology, absolutely worthwhile seeing. But this is a slightly different picture. Tell us where this is.
Well, firstly, this is a bad hair day. I think at that period I was trying out blonde, and I realized it wasn't exactly the most flattering color. This is the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade fighters. So those were your fighters of your Fatah branch in Gaza. And I was interviewing them. What was particularly scary was that when they took off their masks, Howard, they were youngsters, 17, 18. And then they put on those masks, and I was really, really frightened. There's something about when you can't see a person's face that is really frightening. Now, what happened in this picture was that after I did the interview, they wanted a photo with me. And they put their scarf around me, and they put one of their AK-47s in my hand, and they took some pictures of that. And a couple of years later, those photos resurfaced online. And I actually got some death threats with people saying you support the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade, which was the furthest from the truth. But I don't think people appreciate that when you're standing with them, and you're there with an Israeli passport, and you're a nice Jewish girl from Highlands North, and they've put an AK-47 in your hand, and they've put their scarf around you, you're not going to say no to masked men with guns. You know what I mean? And
even in Joburg, we don't say no to masked men with guns. So
that was that picture. That was in Gaza. This is in Iraq. That was what I call my fixer. He was a Peshmerga, which was...
What is a Peshmerga? Sorry.
They're actually back in the news now with Trump saying that the Kurdish fighters, he wants to get them involved in Iran. So you have Kurdish fighters in Iran and Iraq and in Syria. Most of them are based in Iraq, and they're basically fighting for Kurdistan, which would be a state that would be formed out of Syria, Iraq, and this is them again, Syria, Iraq, Iran, and Turkey. And they were hoping, I was there when they were fighting Islamic State, and they called themselves the foot soldiers of the West. And they were hoping that the West, particularly the Americans, after they had sacrificed their own people and gone to fight on foot with Islamic State, would give them their own state, their own Kurdish state. But it didn't happen. But now we hear Trump saying again that he's going to be fighting with the Kurds, or he's using the Kurds as his foot soldiers. Why I laugh at this photo is because I look so overdressed with my helmet and everything. But when you take insurance and you go to war zones, they insist that you wear a helmet and a bulletproof jacket. What was always nice going to war zones was being a woman. They were always, it didn't matter what part of the world I was, they were always so chivalrous. They didn't know what to do. When we arrived at them, they said, sorry, we weren't expecting you, and the only food we have for you is tinned food. And the men would always make a big thing about a woman being on the front line. That was one of the times that it was actually an advantage being a woman. This is me with two of my favorite Russian cameramen, and they would often deploy with me. They were based in Moscow. This is us on an air base in Afghanistan, a war zone. You've written Iraq. I actually think that was Afghanistan. I must check. It was a lot of hurry up and wait. And we would spend hours at airfields because they couldn't always guarantee when we were embedded with the Americans here. They couldn't always guarantee when an American helicopter or plane would arrive. And somebody in South Africa, I forget who it was, sent me a message, an urgent email when they saw this picture, when I was reporting, saying, Paula, for God's sake, put your helmet properly. It's supposed to protect your head, not be comfortably pushed backwards. You see, a nice Jewish girl from This is in Iraq. This was a refugee camp, and it was always heartwarming and heartbreaking at the same time, going to refugee camps, seeing the children, because a lot of the people in the refugee camps were just living ordinary lives. This is the time of Islamic State, and they'd been uplifted and uprooted and forced out of their homes into a refugee camp, sometimes within hours, and the poverty in the refugee camp and the sense of disillusionment. And a lot of people in these refugee camps used to tell me how their biggest wish was to go to Europe. You know, we pick up on the story of people drowning in the seas in Europe, or of Europe being flooded by refugees. But I was very much at the beginning of the story of the refugees who have lost their homes, who have no way to go back because in this time it was the Islamic State have taken over their homes. And they were hearing these stories that Europe had opened its arms to refugees. And that was the dream for so many of them. I remember father saying it was the only way he thought he could give his children a future. This is me and Yuri, an Israeli-Russian cameraman who I spent some time with, quite a bit of time in Ukraine. This is in Ukraine. We're working for the Russian television here. We went to Kiev once, but it became very dangerous, and I had to be taken out. This is back in Iraq with the Peshmerga. And in those days, social media had started. So every time I did a story, I had to tweet it and put it up on Facebook. This is Syria. And this is just the complete devastation and destruction in Syria. The way I went to Syria and Lebanon from Israel is I would travel through Amman or Istanbul, and I would try and get rid of my Israeli passport because I'd have to leave my Israeli passport when leaving Israel. So in Amman, they have lockers in the airport, and I would lock my Israeli passport there and then travel on my South African or British passport. British just because you needed less visas. But for example, when I was in Libya, I hadn't managed to get rid of my Israeli passport, and I'd hidden it in a book. And I vowed I would never put myself through that kind of stress again, because they would check our hotel rooms in all these countries when we weren't there. So that was Syria during the worst of the bombings of the civil war. And there was a whole spate of church bombings in Egypt, where Islamic State in particular were targeting minority communities. There's maybe about 8 Jews who were living in Cairo at that time. I did a story with them, and I wanted to tell them that I was Jewish, but obviously I couldn't because I had a translator who was Arab and who was translating their Arabic to my English. But I met a woman, a Jewish woman, who would only talk to me through the barbed wire of her front door. And she said to me she dreamed of going to Israel, but she heard it was only for Ashkenazi Jews. And when I got back to Israel, I gave her phone number to the Jewish agency, and I said to them, please try follow up with her and see if there's an option to bring her to Israel, because she's obviously under the wrong impression that she can't come to Israel. This was in Afghanistan. We had just arrived from the airport. I literally had not slept. We came from the airport straight to what we call a live position. It was during elections. It was boiling hot, and look at what I'm wearing. I wanted to be sure that I would be covered up completely. They were very strict in Afghanistan about making sure that you completely cover yourself. In fact, I even sometimes wore the outfit of the Taliban, where the only thing you could see was through your eyes. And here I'm doing a live report for Russian TV on the elections. And here was Libya. I was
This, I think, is actually a video, so let's play this.
Well, bring us up to date on those strikes. What are you hearing from inside Libya at the moment?
Well, there's just been a blast of gunfire, which you heard behind me here in the capital city, Tripoli. It's not immediately clear what's going on behind, but a short time ago there were protesters here. So we certainly are starting to feel the effect of this military strike and of the reaction from the Gaddafi regime here from the capital city. Now, so far we are hearing that more than 20 sites have been hit by these warplanes from the international community. Increasingly, it does seem as if this is an operation that will be happening in the east and the west of the country. The French Defense Ministry has confirmed that some 20 French planes have been used and that they've been hitting tanks and military personnel vehicles. Now, that operation has been concentrated largely in the rebel-held town of Benghazi, and the latest word there from rebel fighters is that Gaddafi forces have been pushed to the outskirts. Now, at the same time, we're hearing from the United States that it is playing a leading role in these operations, but not necessarily leading the operations per se. What we know, though, in terms of the US assistance, is that already they have launched preparatory strikes from cruise ships. We know that there are 3 submarines and 25 American ships at this point in the Mediterranean, and that US Tomahawk missiles have landed in the west of the country, in Tripoli and in Misrata. Now, Libyan state television has been reporting for the last few hours that there are heavy civilian casualties. It says that these are happening here in the city of Tripoli, and I can tell you that we have heard a few ambulances driving past. It says they are also happening in the town of Benghazi. They also say that there's been a strike on fuel stores in Misrata. Now, the British Air Force has joined the operations. It's not yet clear exactly what they will be doing, but we know that they have the capability to hit targets and also to assist in surveillance. It is worth also making the point that the Pentagon has stressed that this is only the first phase of what they're calling a multi-phased operation, and that currently there are no American planes flying overhead.
Paula, bring us up to...
Paula,
when that was happening, everybody was running, and I wasn't sure if I should carry on giving the news report, if I needed to get out of there, not to get out of there. And because you're live, you can't actually pause and say to the cameraman or the security guard, should we leave? So I just kept talking. And then a little bit later in the broadcast, the announcer finally says to me, okay, Paula, it sounds like there's a hell of a lot of noise behind you, because the blast started up again. And he said, perhaps we should let you go. And I was like,
and then Ukraine, you actually got expelled from Ukraine.
So this is the photo that got me into trouble. I wasn't laughing. I don't know if it looks to you as if I was, but it was the first time I'd come so close to a Grad missile launcher. It's incredibly loud. And the Russians who I was with were firing at the Ukrainian positions. And I had covered my ears like that because of the noise. And it had gone out in video, and the Ukrainians had freeze framed this and splashed it across all the Ukrainian media with the caption, look at the Russian journalists laughing while Ukrainian soldiers are being killed. And there was a witch hunt, and there were calls for me to be found and killed. And it escalated to such a degree that the next day, I remember covering my face with a scarf. Hopefully no one would recognize me, and I was airlifted out of the country. And I've been banned from Ukraine. I've been banned from Ukraine, not specifically for this report, but for the fact that I was doing reports for a Russian television network. Funny enough, I remember the head of the Simon Wiesenthal Center in Israel saying it's quite an achievement to be banned from Ukraine. Here I'm working with Yuri. We are in action. It was also in Ukraine, the bulletproof jackets and everything always in a rush. This is one of the Russian soldiers. They always told us that they were locals, but the Western media was always reporting that they weren't, that they came in from Russia. I don't really know. I mean, I can just tell you that that's what they told us. They told us they were local, and the Western networks say that it was an orchestrated effort and they were sent from Moscow. But they were definitely disciplined and organized, and they were called the Green Men because of what they were wearing. This, I thought, was quite an artistic photo, for lack of a better word. It's me sitting in Iraq, and I'm doing an interview in front of some water. It's in the middle of nowhere, and a lot of my life was spent in the middle of nowhere. My sister's an air hostess, and she got to stay in 5-star hotels. I got to sleep in the middle of nowhere. When we filmed this that night, we slept across a barrier from Islamic State, and I was woken up at 3 o'clock in the morning with mad firing, and looking through the binoculars, you could actually see the Islamic State on the other side of the sandbags, maneuvering their positions with all their fancy American cars that they had taken. We were pretty close to Islamic State and to jihadists at different times.
So, Paula, I'm going to stop there because that's almost where the story starts to shift. Just before we do that, I want to ask you one question about the Arab Spring. Where were you during the Arab Spring? What did you experience? And then I have one more question before we move on to the second part of the story, which is even more captivating.
I covered most of the Arab Spring. It started in Tunisia. I wasn't in Tunisia, but then it spread to Egypt. And a lot of the Arab Spring was in Egypt. I was there for the whole Arab Spring, except for the day that Mubarak capitulated. It was in the afternoon, and it was going on forever. That morning, I flew back to Israel. And if it was ever a time that I was deeply annoyed with myself, it was to have gone back, because after spending weeks in Egypt, and he's going to resign, they're going to overthrow him, and it didn't happen. For it to happen on the day that I flew back, I thought was a bit unfair. It was dangerous in Cairo. They had almost every night the Million Man March. There were reports of women being raped. That's when the Lara Logan incident happened. I then moved across to Syria. I spent a lot of months in Syria. That's where they had their civil war. I had some dangerous situations in Syria. I was mostly in homes. I also went to Aleppo. I visited, just for my own Jewish connection, the square, Martyrs Square, where Eli Cohen, the Israeli spy, was hanged. And that was very moving to me. It had nothing to do with the Arab Spring, but I managed to say Kaddish at the place where he was hanged. And then Libya. Libya was very scary. As you mentioned earlier, I was there when Gaddafi was overthrown. The Russian embassy closed, and they came to say to us that they are pulling out of Libya. Do we want to go? And Russia Today Arabic left. And myself and the cameraman stayed, but the cameraman could not speak a word of English. He had actually come with another cameraman who was going to be the translator, and that cameraman had arrived in Libya with an Israeli stamp in his passport. So he got duly turned around and put on the next flight out. So what was particularly hard for me was navigating a war zone, and I'm sure it was hard for the Russian cameraman when neither of us could speak to each other. And there we were with bullets flying and missiles landing, and we're trying to communicate whether we should go forward or back. I don't recommend that. That was like an added fear. And like I say, I had my Israeli passport with me on the inside cover of a book I was reading. And in retrospect, I should have just flushed it down the toilet. And I think that was most of the Arab Spring. I did a lot of time in Iraq. I did a lot of time in Afghanistan. And then I came back to South Africa, and I did some countries in South Africa for RT.
So, Paula, the one question I do want to ask you before we move to the second part of tonight is, you got to spend a night in Auschwitz. Tell us that story.
It was a deeply personal story. Russia Today did not know that I had such a strong connection with Auschwitz. My father's family all came from Holland, And my grandfather, my father's father, survived because he'd come to South Africa as a diamond merchant before the war with his brother. And the brother had gone back to Holland when the war broke out. And my grandfather's entire family were wiped out. And a lot of them ended up in Auschwitz. We managed to trace a lot of the family. They either went to Sobibor or Auschwitz. And it was the 70th anniversary. If I'm not mistaken, it was 2015. It was the 70th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. And Auschwitz is in Poland. And with the Polish-Russian politics, they did not invite the Russian President Vladimir Putin. So I guess they just thought maybe they didn't have another journalist to send. I just got a message from head office. Can I please go and cover go to Auschwitz and cover the fact that Putin is not there and hasn't been invited? And I mentioned to them that it was the 4th time I'd gone to Auschwitz. I'd been 3 times before on the March of the Living and on personal trips just to say Kaddish at my family's, I can't even say it, their graves at Auschwitz, essentially. And after I shared the story with RT, they said, would you go back and make a documentary? And of course I would go back and make a documentary. And we landed up spending a night in Auschwitz, as you say. And Howard, you can imagine, Auschwitz is scary enough in the day, but to be there at night when everything seems to be moving and where there seem to be shadows and ghosts, and we were walking through the barracks and to know or to touch those barracks, because we were a filming crew, we were allowed to go to places that you can't go just as a visitor. And I remember the guide telling me that there was once a Holocaust survivor who had come there with his family, and the Holocaust survivor had wanted him and his family to spend the night in the barrack where he had spent during the war. And the family had said to him, come, Dad, let's not stay. You should be pleased that your children and grandchildren don't have to experience this. Let's rather go back to the hotel and order a pizza. And they made a movie called Eating Pizza in Auschwitz. And aside from that, we were the only other filming crew that had actually spent the night in Auschwitz. And it was terrible. My sister joined us. And it was also surreal because she said to me from England, Paula, I'm looking forward to seeing you in Auschwitz. And then she was like, no, let me frame that or rephrase that. You know what I mean? And you stay at a hotel in Auschwitz because it's a town. And then, you go across and you drive to the camp. It was very moving. And in that respect, everyone I know has their own personal story and can tell their own story of their loved ones that died in the Holocaust. But in that way, I felt incredibly privileged to work for a network where I was afforded the opportunity to tell a story that was so personal. And then later I told another story. That documentary was entitled 119 Lives Unlived, because when I researched the story, it turned out that there were 119 direct family members who had been killed. And then later I did a story about my father's mother who came from Belarus. She was actually one of Isaac Ochberg's orphans. And I traveled back to Belarus and I did the story of the family that had not come with my grandmother and her siblings to South Africa. And all of them died in Belarus. And one of the most tragic stories about the Belarus Jews is that they ran out of ammunition. So my family would have been amongst those who would have been thrown into pits and just left to suffocate because there was no ammunition for the guns and there were no bullets to kill people.
Paula, if we've done one thing in the last hour, I think we've developed your credibility. You're a tough, hardened, smart woman whose life suddenly maybe went off the rails. We're going to do a 30-second ad break, and then we're going to come back and tell the part of the story that so many people have been wanting to hear. It's about a return to South Africa. It's about maybe, I said in something today, there's nothing fair in love and war. And I think you're the living embodiment of that. But before we do that, we want to thank our second sponsor for this evening. Our second sponsor is Sky Fans. For the last 29 years, Sky Fans have been doing these handcrafted, unbelievable rooftop fans in people's homes. And we know what a Johannesburg summer is like, the searing heat, the scorching hotness, the fact that none of our homes are built for either hot or cold. And that's why to have a beautiful fan like a Sky Fan in your home is such a privilege. Gilana, please, won't you show us the 30-second video, and then we're going to continue with Paula's story. Gilana, thank you for being on controls this evening and for doing a fantastic job. And to everyone watching us on YouTube, don't forget, you have to click that like and subscribe button, please. That's the one favor we ask you in return for watching this evening. Paula, Russia today starts to fall to pieces after the second invasion of Ukraine. Many of the European journalists leave, the Western journalists leave. You decide to stay for a while, but ultimately you return to South Africa. Tell us your story.
So I need to say that in the 18 years I was with RT, they were incredibly wonderful too. They were a very, very good company to work for, and no complaints. But as you say, the second Ukraine war happens, and I think one of the lessons is that it doesn't matter how much propaganda, how much media, how many stories you tell. I don't think you can compare with what's happening on the ground, and the appetite for Russia and the appetite for Russia's position on the Russia-Ukraine conflict was not something that the international community even wanted to be open to the Russian perspective about. So RT was cancelled and switched off in the United States, the same in most of Europe, the same in South Africa. And round about then, well, actually, it was a direct consequence of that. I was called into the office in Moscow, and I was asked if I would like to come back to Africa, because very much what the Russian government is doing is repivoting itself, repositioning itself with BRICS countries. Russia Today, as a Russian government media house, was following that. So they were quite keen, actually, for me to go to Ethiopia, where the AU is based, but they didn't really mind. And I said, I'd love to come back to South Africa. My dad was not well. My mom lives here, and it would be a nice opportunity to come back to my family. So I sold my apartment in Israel, and I put everything in storage. It was kind of like should I just say a break in my life? I wasn't quite sure what was going to happen afterwards. But I thought I would come back to Israel, and I came back to South Africa. I worked for RT for another 8 months or so. I set up RT Africa, and I went to Somalia. I went to the Central African Republic. I was starting to become a little bit frustrated with RT. It was becoming too much about telling me what to say. And now the whole directive was about Africa. And I don't think people realize just how influential Russia is or wants to become in Africa. And that was becoming very much the reason for setting up RT Africa. So around about this time, my best friend, and we'd been best friends for 20 years, Samantha, introduces me to a guy who she's known for 10 years because she was dating his cousin. And I meet this guy, Trevor, and I fall madly in love. I was 50 years old. I had never been married. I had obviously been in relationships. I'd been in a long 12-year relationship in Israel, but I had never met someone who quite matched me on every single point. And this man matched me on every single point. And I know he's watching. I know that he's going to listen carefully to what I say. I know he's threatened to sue you, Howard, and that's why I'm very grateful that you still decided to go ahead with this. And I think I want to say to him, because I found out that he was conning me the same week my dad died, and we never spoke again. And if I had the opportunity to speak to him again, there would be two things I would want to say. The one would be, what kind of human being pretends to be someone else to the point that you fall in love with the person? I fell in love with who Trevor pretended to be. And towards the end of our relationship, I found out he was nothing like that. And the man he is very far away from the type of man that I would have fallen in love with. But what kind of low a person must go to make someone fall in love with them, pretending to be someone they are completely not, to lie to a person when her father is dying, to scream at her every day because she spends time with her dying father and not with him. He always used to say to me, a wife, we got married, and he used to say to me, we're newlyweds, and a wife's place is next to her husband, not with her father. He knew my dad was dying. He knew he was lying to me, and he still managed to have the lack of soul to say that to me. And the second thing I would want to say to him is that he thought he shamed me into silence. And I was silent for a long time after this happened. There were weeks and months when I could not get out of bed. I was so heartbroken. I had saved up. I lost my savings. I mentioned I sold my apartment in Israel. I have cashed in my pensions. I've cashed in my insurance policies. I have nothing that will guarantee me economically and financially in my future. And I spent every last cent on him and on a project that did not come to exist. He said that he had an arrangement with the Saudi government and I was setting up a television channel for them. And so my second question to him, or my second point, was that he did shame me and he did silence me for a long time. But the reason I decided to do this webinar is that this is how I'm reclaiming my power, Trevor Bester. And you will never again be allowed to do this to me. And please God, as more and more women become aware of who you are and what you are, you won't be allowed to do it to someone else.
So, Paula, you're going to take us through the story from the start. We're going to put up our disclaimer notice, which we included in the beginning. We have a long relationship with you and a trusted relationship with you, which is why we're pretty sure and pretty confident that we should go ahead and tell tonight's story. But Trevor did send us a cease and desist letter, and we decided to go ahead regardless. We offered him the opportunity to come on tonight's broadcast and, in fact, tell his side of the story. That he declined to do. At any point in time, should he wish to do so, he is more than welcome to come and contradict anything that you say or point out any discrepancies or tell his side of the story. We're committed to openness and transparency, and we welcome the opportunity, should he wish a right of reply, to be able to come on and do that. But Paula, tonight the story is about you. Start us at the beginning.
So Howard, thank you. I would love Trevor to come on, and he's a coward for not coming on tonight. I would be more than happy to have heard his side of the story, and I laugh when I think about that, because everything I'm going to share with you now can be and is substantiated with documents, with forgeries, with lawyers, with my bank account statements. So nothing I'm saying is anything that I cannot corroborate. So a lot of women get scammed online. You have scamming groups in Nigeria. You have something called Yahoo Boys, where they pretend to be someone and their groups working in shifts. You have groups in East Asia who are actually trafficked people who are being forced, who've had their passports taken from them, and they're being forced to flirt online with people and scam people for money. So a lot of it is online. My story is actually not online, so I don't know if that makes it worse or better, and I don't even think those are the right words. But I meet Trevor for the first time, and, go with your gut instinct. My gut instinct was that he was a bit of a show-off and nothing to write home about. I then went back to Moscow, and I reported for 6 months. And this was before I came back to South Africa and set up a channel, and Moscow had asked me to move back. So I think a little bit of what happened in that 6 months is I got tired. I think part of it is exhaustion and covering a war. And when I came back and I met him, I was going to Mozambique, and Samantha said to me, he works in security, and I was looking for a security guard or a security company to offer me protection in Mozambique, because there is the fighting in northern Mozambique with Islamic State, and where I can, I try to take security. And we had a meeting in London. And I remember him saying to me in that meeting that he had been so taken by me that the previous 6 months he'd been following me online. And I took that as such a compliment. He told me he'd watched all my videos, he'd watched all my stories. In retrospect, that was him doing his homework, and he was grooming himself, because when I had that second meeting with him, he gave me a story that he hadn't given me the first time we met, and I didn't connect the dots. And I didn't understand that it was a story that he had completely manufactured out of what he had witnessed and learned about me online. He told me he was a mercenary. What I'm going to share with you now, nothing is true, but I believed it was. He told me he was a mercenary and that he only had a year to live because he had brain cancer. That was the reason why later he asked me to get married. He said with someone who only has a year to live, there is nothing that he would want more than to marry me. And I don't know if other women would fall for that, but I remember at the time being quite touched and thinking, he wants to marry me, and that's the only thing he wants. And I was not a woman who wanted to get married, but it just touched me. And I mean, let me just mention that I'm talking about something. Trevor and I got married about 2.5 years ago. So, I mean, it's amazing that he wants to come on and talk when he only had a year to live, according to what he told me. He told me he was in special forces. I did actually go online and research him, but there was nothing about him online. And he told me that's because he was with special forces and he was a mercenary. Did I really think that he was going to have anything online? He told me he worked for the United Nations and he was based in Kenya and he ran their operations. He also told me he lived and worked in every country in Africa. And it all was, and he loved Russia. I mean, not that you need to love Russia to be someone that I would be attracted to, but it was an added bonus. You know, he really understood Russian politics. If you knew how many hours I have listened to his stories of war, I stopped talking about my stories of war because they paled in significance. And I still sometimes can't get my head around that those hours and hours we spent talking was actual nonsense on his side. He told me about coups he was involved in Africa. He told me about smuggling money into South Africa. He told me about fighting, and there was a crossfire. I don't even remember which country it was. And him and this close colleague of his, Andrei, who later died in the Russia-Ukraine war, and he should have been with him, and that they were the third force that prevented a civil overthrow. It all sounds ludicrous now because we know he's a con artist, but at the time, it really seemed believable. And something I want to share with people, and I think only somebody who's been in the situation understands, is that they groom you. Trevor love bombed me. He was everything I'd ever dreamed of and never thought I would meet. I remember at the age of 49, Samantha saying to me when I came out of my previous relationship, Paula, are you sure you want to end this relationship? Because even if you're not madly in love, what men go for women in their 50s? You're probably never going to meet someone. And then at 50, I meet this man who just bowls me over. And I actually thought I was going to write a book, and the book was going to be called Second Chances. And it was going to be for all the women out there like me who never thought that they would find their dream man and who'd been single, or women who were divorced and thought that, you know, they would never get a second chance. And this was going to be Second Chances. How the most unsuspecting person, me, found her match. And so it kind of happened very fast, which is another thing they do. They don't give you enough time to breathe. Trevor moved in pretty quickly with me. He had all his money was tied up in Kenya. They always have money who's tied up. So that's tied up. They always are millionaires or very wealthy. They just can't access their money. And the next thing is that he knows people in Saudi Arabia. And I had always mentioned I was fascinated by Saudi Arabia. I'd never been, but it was always my dream to go. And there were rumors at the time that Saudi Arabia was setting up an English channel, a 24-hour English channel. And Trevor knew the people in Saudi Arabia. I mean, it obviously now seems like it was the perfect lie. But at the time, I just couldn't believe my luck. And I set up an office in Sandton. I employed 40 people, some big names like Uveka Rangapar, Jane Dutton, Juliet, I've just gone blank what Juliet's surname is, Juliet Newell, Ray White. And, you know, my reputation was on the line because I had known these people for years. And I said to them, some of them left previous employments, like Neil Ferguson, who was working at the SABC. And Neil came into my office and he said to me, is this channel going to work? And I said to Trevor, is this channel happening? And Trevor swore that it was happening. And I had no reason not to believe him. And I poured millions into that account, into that channel. And so for a year, we made stories in Sandton. They weren't news stories. They were stories that the moment the Saudis agreed, they would sign and they would literally take over what I had been putting together. By the end of the year, I had enough material to go online 24/7 for at least 4 to 6 months. We had everything in place, dramas, youth shows, animal programs, travel shows, everything. And I was putting all my money into this. Trevor would go to the Saudi embassy, he told me, 2 or 3 times a week, and he met with a guy they called Marwan. He had one of those hijabs. I don't know exactly what you call them in the Saudi culture, but he had one hanging up in his office, and he would leave the office wearing it because he was going on Friday to pray with them in the mosque in Pretoria. And having worked in the Middle East, a lot of it sounded plausible because it is a relationship. I said to him, would the Saudis not mind that I'm Israeli or that I'm Jewish? And he said, no, on the contrary, not. And then October the 7th happened. And he said, the Saudis don't want to launch now because you're Jewish and Israeli. They want to launch later, and it would give a good message to the world that the Saudis are working with an Israeli. But they're putting it on hold, but please carry on making all these programs. And so where did the money come for these programs? It was all the money that I had, just pumping it into people's salaries, pumping it into the expensive rent, everything. And we were running like a fully fledged newsroom. And I was promising everybody that this was going to go off the ground. I never met the people in Saudi. But Trevor said, like, there was no need to. He was doing the meetings. Howard, I just want to say something that I know it sounds maybe because people know I've been conned, like how could I be so naive? And when my dad got very sick, the week before he died was the first time that I had a chance to sit down and look at the bank statements. We were running a 24-hour channel, and I was put in charge of content. I made myself in charge of content, and I put Trevor in charge of the money. And I never checked the bank statements. I didn't have time to. And people say, how can you be so naive that you just let your husband run the whole financial aspect? The thing is that I was in love with whoever I believed this man was. And it would never have entered my mind to steal money from my husband or lie to my husband. And it never entered my mind for 1 second that Trevor would be stealing money or lying to me. When I had that week when my father was very ill and I had left the office to go and sit next to my dad's deathbed, and I was going through bank statements because I'd started becoming suspicious, I found that in the last few months, Trevor had stolen around 6 million rand from my bank account, and he had put it directly into his bank account. He kept having cars that he was renting, but I found a paper trail of cars that he bought and sold, and then he would keep profit for himself. There was just, it was unbelievable. He was signing contracts. I mean, I will mention names. He signed a contract with the Kenyan government. I've got the Kenyan government who are in touch with me, who want to sue Trevor in conjunction with me. Anton Gilmore, if that name means anything to anyone, is a former South African boxing champion. On behalf of the TV channel, Trevor started promising him, doing deals with him. Bobby Kirsch, the head of slap fighting South Africa. These are all people who've met with me since it all came to light. And Trevor, I mean, Anton Gilmore lost all his money. Bobby Kirsch almost lost his. I mean, Trevor was signing deals left, right, and center. And everything came to a head that week that my dad was dying. My sister convinced me to go to the Saudi embassy. And on the way to the Saudi embassy, I said to her, if Trevor finds out that I have gone to the Saudi embassy because I'm not sure that he's telling the truth, he is going to be so angry. And I remember Haley saying to me in the car, Paula, let's rather deal with that when it happens. Let's first go to the Saudi embassy and see if it's true. And there's 2 Saudi embassies. I arrived at the first one, and they'd never seen Trevor's picture. And there was no one there by the name of Marwan. And I was in disbelief. And then they said, but there's the Saudi military embassy or military attaché. Go there. And I remember my heart hammering and thinking, oh, thank God, of course, it would be the military one. And I went there and I parked outside, and there were only 2 security guards in charge. And the one contacted the other. So when one is on shift, the other is not, and vice versa. Neither of them had ever seen Trevor's picture. And there was no one by the name of Marwan who had ever worked there. And that was the lowest point of my life. I couldn't find where I'd parked the car. And I was walking around Pretoria. Crying. And I couldn't believe that I lost millions, to the point that this is a case that justifies being heard by the Hawks. And I had someone from the Hawks contact me and say that they can only deal with this case in 2 years' time. They're so far behind. And I'd made the mistake because I'd felt sorry for Trevor's mom. She was unemployed and she's in her 70s. I took her on to be my internal bookkeeper. And I took on Trevor's daughter to do social media. I really was in love with this man, and I believed him. And all those fraudulent bank transfers were made by his mom. So his mom is as much to blame as he is. I opened cases with the police of theft. of fraud, of misrepresentation. Then the police lost the papers. And then I reopened everything again. I went for legal advice, only to be told that Trevor qualifies with what he does and what I have proof of, that he could land up 35 years behind bars. We're talking millions. And the 6 million he stole is only a small part of it. And that was just the part that he put directly into his bank account. But the problem is, and this is why these guys get away with it, is that he stole all my money. So I need a lawyer. I need to be able to pay lawyers to put him into jail. And now I'm in a situation that I don't have money to put him into jail. It becomes a vicious circle. And when I came back from sitting Shiva to the office, he had locked me out of the office. He had forged his signature. I've got papers. Trevor, I have all the documents with the forged signatures and documents that I never signed, saying that I gave the business over to him, saying that I gave him all the equipment. There was at least another 6 million rand worth of equipment in the office, of cameras and computers. Trevor took all of those. And in the time that my father was dying and died, I wasn't in the office. And I don't know what stories he told the staff, but the staff weren't paid their last month's salaries because I'd run out of money. And I take full responsibility for that. But he managed to convince them that, I don't know what he convinced them, that I decided not to pay them, that there was money and I didn't want to give the money. I called a staff meeting and I explained that the company would have to go insolvent because there was no more money to put into the company. And I asked if anybody in the staff had an idea, wanted to carry on working in some capacity. And Trevor threatened them. I found this out afterwards, that if anybody stayed in touch with me, would not pay their salaries. So he promised that he would pay their salaries, which of course he didn't, but the staff all disconnected from me. And so the staff have lost out because many of them lost 1 salary, some lost 2. And all that equipment has disappeared. I told the police to go to his house as soon as possible because he was going to steal it. The police eventually went round and there wasn't a lot of equipment left. But what was so interesting is that Trevor has opened a channel online. My channel was called Bricks Global Television Network. His is called Bricks TV. And all the material that I had put together over the course of a year is there. And it's just amazing that some of it has been finished editing. I know exactly what material we had. And he has subsequently edited the material and put it up for sale. And the man is a fraud. I've had people contacting me left, right, and center. I've had, apparently he was on a dating site. I was told that the entire time he was with me, he had a girlfriend that he was feeding my money to, and she opened a shop on the East Rand selling decorations. I was told that he's on a dating site, and then someone put up the word fraud. The reason why he's so scared of me going public with his story is because the only thing he has to live on is his reputation, which he's tried to ruin mine. And that's basically where things stand. And I challenge him on anything I've said, because not only is it all true, but I have the documents, the bank statements, the paperwork, everything to back it up. And if I had the money, I would definitely be taking him to court and making sure that he spends 35 years behind bars.
So, Paula, what part of the story was true? Was any of it true? And what do you subsequently know? You once told me a story about a tattoo as well.
So if anybody has found themselves in this situation, you come out of it and you don't know what to believe. It's as if the entire ground on which you are standing has been pulled from beneath. I married this man. I married the man. And people said, can you be sure that Trevor is even his name? No, I can't. I've subsequently found out that he's married to 2 or 3 other women. I don't know how Home Affairs approved our marriage if he's married to other women, but then I was told that they're women overseas. I started wondering if his mother's really his mother. You actually start doubting your take on reality. I went to the parents' house. His father had died. Maybe his father hadn't died. I think that part of the story is true. I think it is his mother. I did see pictures of Trevor when he was younger, but you honestly start doubting everything. I don't think any of it is true. My brother and sister, and this is something I actually want to say, my brother and sister had hired a private investigator right at the beginning, and it came back that he was a mechanic. And my brother shared that with me, and I told my brother I'm not interested and I don't believe it. And the one thing I was thinking that I do want to share with people is what I have learned, in addition to a million things, is the people who love you most and the people who want the best for you do tell you the truth. Trevor, my mother, my brother, and my sister saw through Trevor from the day they met him. And part of the grooming process is they isolate you from your friends and family because they're not so caught up in it. Your friends and family see through to the person. And I've learned my lesson that, you know, I remember putting my hands on my hips and saying, I'm a war journalist. I have looked death in the eyes and I've looked killers in the eyes. But those people were not playing on my emotions. They were not manipulating me. And Trevor, because I really fell in love with this persona, was able to manipulate me in a way I've never been manipulated before. And so if I can publicly say to my mom and my brother and my sister that I'm terribly sorry I didn't listen to them. They were right. And that's the lesson maybe for people who, when we meet someone and we're not sure if the person is who we think they are, is to actually listen to the people who really love us and who really want us to be. Trevor distanced me from my sister, who's my best friend, and from my brother and my mother, and the whole family goes through the trauma. Trevor was the guy who grew up on the other side of town. He comes from Krugersdorp, which in itself maybe, you know, I shouldn't say that because I've had people say that they come from Krugersdorp and they're actually really nice people. Anyway, but you know, I was the good girl at school. I always did so well. And Trevor had tattoos all over and he was the bad boy. And I think maybe some girls can understand that. You get attracted to the bad boy. And I remember the tattoo you referencing is that he had this tattoo on his, I think it's on the inside of his left arm. And on that second date, when I started to fall for him, he said to me, it was the name, it was in Arabic. And he said it was the name of a 9-year-old girl he had mistakenly killed when he was in Iraq. And he'd written her name on his arm because he wanted to remember for the rest of his life what he'd done. And I even remember saying to him, we must go back to Iraq. If we can find the mother's name, maybe we can go back and do a documentary, but he was never interested in going back to Iraq. And what's so interesting, Howard, is another part of the story is I had a colleague in Gaza when I worked for RT. His name is Shadi, and I never met him. And when the war in Gaza broke out, Shadi was not in Gaza on October the 7th. He was in Istanbul with his family. And Trevor promised that if Shadi comes to South Africa with his kids, he'll get them all South African passports. And that's a completely different story, but he completely lied. And this poor Gazan man with money he didn't have, he probably borrowed the money, came to South Africa. And the first time I saw Shadi was in South Africa after we'd been colleagues, arranging, talking to each other on the phone, day in and day out for maybe the better part of 10, 15 years. The first time I met him was at my office in Sandton, and I introduced him to Trevor. And he took one look at Trevor's Arabic tattoo and started to say, oh, and then stopped himself. And Trevor blushed and I blushed. I thought he understood that it was someone Trevor had killed. But later, Shadi told me in private that the tattoo said, Trevor loves, and then there was the name of the girl that he couldn't read because it was under the top of Trevor's shirt. So Trevor had tattooed the name of at least one woman that he had fallen in love with or conned or whatever Trevor does on his arm. So maybe that's a reason why I should go and learn Arabic.
Paula, we have a few more minutes, and please, we ask everyone who's watching, if they have questions or comments, now's the opportunity to ask Paula those questions. Please post into the chat on Zoom, on YouTube and Facebook, and Gilana will make sure that all of that is brought across. But Lee asked the question, what was the first thing that made you suspicious?
We started running out of money, and Trevor never brought in 1 cent. I had made him the CEO of the company. I had just assumed that he would know what to do. And I started to get panicked because I had spent millions. And I knew that we weren't going to be able to pay the salaries that month unless the money came in from the Saudis. And I think it was out of absolute desperation that when my sister said to me, go to the Saudi embassy, that I went to the embassy. And then the whole story unraveled from there. And there were 1 or 2 days that I knew that Trevor was lying to me, but I was still at home with him, or he was in my home, and I didn't tell him because I didn't know what to do. I was still trying to catch up with myself. but that was it was out of desperation. And as we started running out of money, Trevor's story started to unravel a bit. He'd mentioned, I can't remember the name now, but he mentioned someone he'd been in the army with. And then he kind of told the story again and gave me a different guy's name. There were a few things that were starting not to match up. And I think either Trevor had become so confident that he wasn't paying so much attention to the lies, or he was starting to panic a little bit because the money was unraveling. And the one night he never came home. I had spent the night at my dad. It was actually Yom Kippur evening. And I came home early the next morning. And Trevor hadn't slept there, and the wedding ring was next to the bed. So I knew he was messing around. And I think he was already looking for his next victim.
One question that Debbie has is, what happened to Samantha, who introduced you guys?
You know, even more than the betrayal from Trevor is the betrayal from Samantha, because I adored Samantha. She was my best friend. And my father adored her. He called her his adopted daughter. And for a woman to do this to another woman, I mean, not that we expect it from men, but like, I mean, what happened to women? What happened to women friendship? And Samantha and I stopped talking to each other. And you know, I had said to her in the beginning, I had said, Samantha, is there anything about this man that you want to warn me about? And she sat in front of me smoking and never said a word. And maybe in her mind, I don't even know what she thinks in her mind. I know she didn't warn me. And she had every opportunity to. And I've thought about it. Did she not know? She knew who Trevor was. She knew precisely who Trevor was, and she never warned me. And that broke me. Whether Samantha and Trevor are in it together, I don't know either. You know, you start doubting all aspects of reality. But I do feel deeply betrayed by my best friend. And that's a betrayal that actually cuts deeper than a betrayal from your husband, if that's possible.
So I mentioned to you just before we went live at 7 that I was going to ask you the question, why the decision to go public with the story? And while you answer that, there's so many people, thousands and thousands of people watching us tonight on Zoom, on YouTube and on Facebook. I'd love everyone just to leave you a message, because the bravery to tell a story like this, a story, if I'm allowed to say, of complete humiliation, from being of the top of your game, world famous, award-winning war journalist, to being a victim, the ability to go and show that degree of vulnerability is one of the bravest things you could ever do. What was that thing that allowed you to make the decision to go public with your story? And please, if I can ask everyone, please leave Paula a message.
Thank you, Howard. You know, my mom warned me. The first time I spoke publicly was at Limud. And my mom said to me, do you really want everyone to know what you've been through? I have to be honest that some of it was just for my own sanity. I wonder if people can imagine, and I'm sure there are people that have been let down. When this happened with Trevor, the first few days were tears and just praying that it wasn't true. And there was even a part of me that was like, even if it is true, let me just go back to it and live in my bubble. I just want to live in the bubble. It was easier than the reality of what had happened. I was so ashamed that me, somebody who thought she was heading up a 24-hour international channel, who thought she'd I had traveled the world, but who thought she was the top of her game, had been conned by a mechanic when my brother, my mother, my sister had seen through him straight away. And I had believed him so 100% that I had lost everything. There were days that I couldn't get out of bed, and I lay there thinking, all the money's gone. Everything I've worked for 30 years is gone. He's ruining my reputation. You know, I don't know what he told the staff, but whatever he told them, and he's a good manipulator. I was married to the guy, so I can't hold the staff responsible for believing whatever lies he told them. There were days that I just literally could not get out of bed. Roz Basarabi is a friend of mine, and she sat with me one day and she gave me guidance, and she said, the first thing you do is you put your left foot out of bed, and then your right foot, and you go and you brush your teeth, and then you go back to bed. And then the next time you do that, and you try and have a cup of tea, and slowly you'll come back to yourself. So the first reason to go public was to make sense. I've been so driven my whole life, and it felt like he had just taken part, like 2 years of my life. I'd known him for 6 months, and we were married for a year. So 1.5 years of my life just disappeared. And I wanted to try and make sense to myself that that year and a half meant something, that it wasn't just a complete destruction. And when I spoke at Limud, I was so scared. I was so scared that people would think so little of me. Believe me, I have thought so little of me. There's nothing anyone can tell me that I haven't already told myself. How can I be so stupid? How could I be so naive? How could I just hand over my finances to somebody? And after that talk, people came up and hugged me. And that was one of the most moving moments of my life. And I'll try not to cry, but it's when the community steps forward and people in your most vulnerable moments show you that they really accept you and that you don't have to be ashamed, that you made a human mistake, that you fell in love. And love is we're supposed to be naive when we fall in love, and we're supposed to trust the other person, and we're not supposed to double question ourselves or cross-check ourselves as to whether or not we share our finances with our husband. And you're not supposed to go and ask the police for a security clearance on your husband. You know, maybe we are. Maybe the world in which we live today, we are supposed to do that. So, you know, you said affairs of the heart. So the one thing is, it really helped me sharing my story. And I don't know where the idea came to share the story, but thank God I found that idea. And if anybody finds themselves in that position, sharing just took away some of that shame. And the second thing was that if I could share my story, and whether that stops another woman being conned by Trevor, I don't know if that's so possible. But a few women have contacted me. In fact, I think I mentioned that about a dozen women reached out even before this webinar, just from seeing the advert, and said to me that they'd been in similar positions. And I know how they feel, and they know how I feel. And it's that shame that keeps us quiet. And if we can kind of just help each other speak out and know that we're not alone, there's something so beautiful and so healing in knowing that you're not alone. And I also wanted to say that if anybody has any idea how to bring Trevor to book, or any of these men to book, I'm all ears. You know, my biggest weapon at the moment is this webinar, and it's talking about it and writing about it. But if anybody has any other ideas on how we can get these scam artists not to get away with this, because I know Trevor's onto his next victim. I heard he had a new girlfriend, and then I don't know if that's ended and he's onto his next girlfriend, and he probably was with different girlfriends even while he was with me. And besides what that's done to me emotionally, but maybe a way to you know, the injustice of the whole thing. After everything I've been through, he's still sitting out there, never mind claiming that what I'm saying is not true. He's busy scamming people and conning people left, right, and center. So where's the justice in that? And there was nothing forthcoming from the police. This is a country where I think you can literally get away with murder. I was taken into the one police room in Sandton, and it's a room where they do crime, but specifically fraud. And the policeman showed me papers from the floor up to the ceiling of fraud cases just in this area, just in the Sandton area. And he just took one file off the top of the pile, and it was a woman who had been frauded out of 10,000 Rand. And she's on the street. I mean, Trevor took me for millions, and he nearly took my mom's apartment. My mom and I live together now, and it was the apartment that Trevor and I were living in. And he was about to get the sharks, and he wanted me to sell the apartment, and he promised that the Saudi money would be in, and it didn't come in. So Trevor wouldn't have felt 2 cents worth if my mom and I were out on the street today, which we would have been. So this is the levels to which these guys would go. And so just anything, what would be a sense of justice would really be to see him locked up. And again, I know he's listening, and he must know that I will, to the best of my abilities, try and get him locked up. I just need to figure out how exactly I'm going to do it. But he doesn't have a conscience. These guys do not have consciences. And so he doesn't care about what I'm saying. The only thing he cares about is how it reflects on him. He doesn't care what he did to me.
Paula, questions coming in. Are you still married? Did you get divorced? Have you seen Trevor since you discovered? What's the status of your relationship?
So we're not married. It took a year to get the divorce. Initially, Trevor queried the divorce, something along the lines that he deserves more. I mean, the man came into the marriage with nothing and wanted to leave it with everything. So I'm happily single again. my cousin said to me, I should look at the one bright side, is that I'm now 50, I'm going to be 53 this month. And he said, when you're 53 and you've never been married, my cousin's 60, he said, people always look at you and wonder, why have you never been married? He said, at least now, if you say you're divorced, it's a little bit more socially acceptable. So maybe I can say I'm a divorcee rather than just being single my whole life. I regret the time he took from my dad. You know, money is one thing, but my father, and I was so close to him. And those last few months when I could have been sitting with my dad and talking with my dad and having something real in my life and not wasting it with Trevor. I don't know if this question's come in, but people often ask me about the cancer. It was all a lie. And he always used to tell me that he was going for checkups. And a few times I said, please, can I come with you? And he always used to say to me, I want a wife, not a nurse. So I don't know where he was going in those checkups, whether it was to girlfriends or whether it was to the casino. Another question I often get is, where do I think the money went? I think he's a gambler. Again, I'm not even sure who this man was. And I think he's probably gambled everything away.
So, Paula, what does your future look like? What are you doing now?
So it's all kind of collided, and I'm really hoping, and I'm trying to enter the speaking circuit in South Africa and abroad. And two kind of messages. The one is, I think I'm a bit tired of going to physical war zones. Not to say I'll never go again, but I think it's really interesting if you look at the information war zones that we're all living in. Every time you open your phone, I was talking about it a little bit earlier. And so I've started putting together training courses and giving presentations, and I really am hoping I can make a career out of showing people the tactics that are used in physical war zones that are repeated in information war zones. And I think this might hit people harder or closer at home, because many people might not actually go to a physical war zone or want to go to one. But whether you want to or not, you are in an information war zone. And the question I'm so often given is, how do I know what to believe? And which news networks can I trust? So that whole minefield, literally, is where I see myself entering academically. I have a master's to finish in Israel. I'll go back to Israel later in the year. And then parallel to that, I do think there's some irony that here you have a seasoned war journalist who got conned, and the tactics or the whole pool of deception, the whole grooming for how Trevor conned me is actually how information warfare works. And you can draw parallels between manipulation in romance fraud and manipulation in information fraud. So I don't think the Trevor story was just, well, I mean, I don't know, you try and make sense of it, but I would also like to be involved somehow in scamming and conning. And I don't think these things happen out of the blue.
When you say you'd like to be involved in scamming and conning, I presume not in the same way that Trevor was.
Not actually doing it myself, but involved in organizations that are fighting it. Online, and they call it romance fraud, is one of the fastest growing manipulations out there. And obviously we don't know the true figures because people are so embarrassed to come forward. I know of many, and I'm embarrassed as a woman. A man who gets conned, particularly in a romance situation and framework, is 100 times even more embarrassed, I would imagine. And I know men who've been conned and fraud romantically. And so lend myself, and if there's any good that can come out of my story, please God, I can be involved in the efforts to try to stop it happening to other people.
Let's try and give some advice to people as well, because we've got a big audience watching us this evening. I want to tell the story of one of my next door neighbors who was on Tinder, and he met a woman on Tinder, and she asked him what he did, and he told her where he worked, and the next thing she asked for nudes, which he sent her. And following that, she tried to extort money out of him, saying, if you don't give me money, I'm sending pictures of you naked to your employers. Now, chances are that she was a 6-foot-tall, muscular Nigerian man. And luckily, just for him, luckily, he didn't have his pictures and his junk in the same photograph. But I think with dating apps, with WhatsApp, with social media, there's so many opportunities, because there's a distance, there's a barrier, that people do things that they would never do in real life. And so, Paula, if maybe you can give people some advice in the closing moments of our webinar, what you look out for, what are the red flags, and what are the things that should be ringing those bells and creating a little more suspicion in our lives and our relationships, not just in love, but generally.
I'm going to do that right now, Howard. I had a chance just to look down at some of the comments, and I just want to say thank you to everybody who's writing in. I'm going to read the comments afterwards, and they are heartwarming and they mean the world to me. Thank you. Someone also wrote that they just checked, and Trevor's online selling himself as the CEO of Bricks TV, and he's concocted a whole history that's all a lie of what he did. I go back to the point I said earlier. When you meet someone, you must have a trusted friend or a trusted family member. Do not let them isolate you. Trevor isolated me. I mean, we used to go out for dinner. We stopped going out for dinner because he accused me of flirting with the waiters. And I stopped staying in touch with my male friends because he was convinced that a woman can't be friendly with men. And then I stopped being in touch with my female friends because he was dying of cancer and would not want to spend all my time with him. So part of the manipulation is the isolation. So definitely, if you find yourself meeting someone, do not let yourself fall into that grooming process, of which a huge part is the isolation. Make sure that you have a friend or family or someone you trust that you introduce the person to and trust the advice that they give you. I learned that the hard way. I'm very scary of online dating. I don't think I would do it. I know that there's a lot of these online dating apps that have inbuilt security, and I know there's a lot online about how to stay safe in the online dating world. So if people are doing online dating, I don't know how to stay safe in online dating, but I very much encourage you to read that. Howard, here's a scary story I got told where you have, I mean, we're talking about fraud, and one of the comments here was you get all kinds of fraud. Obviously, you get financial fraud as well, which is huge. And, you know, you have eye detection that sometimes is used if you want to go into a bank account where his partner was sleeping, and he held up the laptop and he was able to enter his partner's banking account even though his eyes were closed, because you can do eye detection with closed eyes. So the kind of advances that are being made in fraud are unbelievable. I had a phone call the other day from the bank phoning to warn me that money has been taken out of my dad's bank account. And when I told them my father is dead, then the phone was put down because they didn't obviously know how to follow up with that. So there's fraud left, right, and center. I don't really have good advice in general. That's exactly what I plan to work on. But I think that everyone has to be aware that there is fraud happening all the time, whether it's with our bank apps, whether it's with people. And you can't do everything in person anymore. And we're moving more and more into a digital world, which means that online fraud is going to become probably the number one concern that we all have. So this is something we need to focus on, is teaching our children how to be safe and teaching ourselves how to be safe.
Paula Slier, we've been going for nearly 2 hours now. You've given us so generously of your time, and more importantly, you've given so much generously by sharing this remarkable life and remarkable story. I wanted to make sure that we didn't just tell the story of the fraud, because as a remarkable and terrible and amazing as that story is, you have lived a life like no other person. And I thought it would be remiss if we didn't start at the beginning, the stories of the SABC, the stories of Snooki Zikalala, the stories of the Arab Spring and Al-Qaeda and ISIS and Libya. We can't tell that story, the second part, without understanding the remarkable human being that you are. I think you've made some weird and crazy decisions in life. I think joining RT was a crazy and probably wrong decision. Staying with RT was a wrong decision. Getting together with Trevor was a wrong decision. But you know something? All of life is a great journey. And the important thing is that we learn every step of the way. It's certainly been a life that should be written down in books and probably a television series made about it. But more importantly, you have stolen the heart of everyone who's watched this evening. You've seen these hundreds and hundreds of messages that have come in this evening, messages of support and love for you. If ever there was a sense that you've been embraced by people, I think you're going to get that sense tonight. I'm going to leave the chat open for another 5 minutes, but Paula Slier, My heart absolutely goes out. We've known each other for 30 something years. And each time I see you, my love for you just grows and grows.
Thank you. And Howard, well, firstly, thank you for the opportunity to tell my story. And again, I'm starting to read some of these messages and they mean the world to me. Thank you. And you're right. I mean, life is an adventure and I'm not the only person who this happened to. And please God, there won't be too many people here tonight who have had it happen or will have it happen. But I guess these things make us stronger. And as you say, they're a chapter in our life. They're an adventure. And I'm looking forward to the time that Trevor is just going to be one of those adventures and a chapter in a book that's going to have many more chapters from now onwards. I think he thought that he had destroyed me and that I would never get out of bed. And this is also part of my story, is recovering from this and moving forward. And so maybe I should thank him for the opportunity to show my strength, because I think our strength comes from times in our lives that are very difficult. So Howie, thank you for having me here and for the opportunity to share.
Paula, in case you think I don't listen to you or remember the things you tell me, I want to just tell a humorous comment that you probably told me 5 years ago. We were sitting at the Grand together with your parents, strippers all around us.
Already, yeah.
and your boyfriend at the time, Avi, there, and you turned to me and said, you know, you said to me, I don't speak any Hebrew and he doesn't speak any English. But the more Hebrew I learn and the more English he learns, the more we realize we have less and less in common.
And we were together for 12 years.
A perfect
time learning the language.
Exactly, a perfect relationship. Paula Slier, thank you so much for joining us this evening, and to the so many thousands and thousands of people who've tuned in and watched. We'll see you again soon, but thank you for sharing your hearts and your comments with Paula. I'll leave the chat open for the next 5 minutes or so. Good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.